The knock came just as I was setting the dinner table. It wasn't loud, but it had a strange weight to it, like whoever was on the other side already knew something I didn't. When I opened the door, a woman stood there wearing a white veil, her hands trembling as rain poured down around her. Her voice was sharp but broken when she spoke. "You stole my life." I froze. I'd never seen her before, yet something about her voice made my stomach twist. And then, she lifted her veil. For a second, I couldn't breathe. The face looking back at me was my own. If you want to know how one knock changed everything I believed about who I was, stay till the end. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment below where you're watching from. My name is Nora Hale. I'm 32 years old, and up until that night, I believed I had a normal, peaceful life. I was married to a man named Ethan, a quiet and caring architect who always knew how to make me laugh. We lived in a small house on a quiet street in Portland, surrounded by maple trees that turned gold in the fall. It wasn't glamorous, but it felt safe. It felt like home. 6 months earlier, I'd been in a terrible car accident. I woke up in the hospital with a pounding headache, a broken wrist, and only fragments of my memory. The doctors told me I had suffered temporary amnesia, and that some memories might take time to return. Ethan was there every day, holding my hand, feeding me stories about our life together, our first trip, the house we built, the dreams we shared. I believed every word because I had no reason not to. He'd smile and say, "You don't need to remember everything, Nora. Just remember that you're safe now." After I was discharged, things slowly went back to normal, or what I thought was normal. I went back to my job teaching art at a local elementary school. My mother, Margaret, visited often, helping me around the house and reminding me of childhood memories I couldn't quite place. She was loving but careful, avoiding questions about my accident. When I'd ask, "Do you know what happened that night?" she'd shake her head and change the subject. At first, I didn't think much of it, but small things started to bother me. My reflection in the mirror sometimes felt unfamiliar, not wrong, but distant. I'd find myself tracing the faint scar on my collarbone, wondering how it got there. People at the grocery store would smile at me and say things like, "It's good to see you back, Anna." When I corrected them, "It's Nora, actually," they'd look confused, even embarrassed. One afternoon, I was painting in my classroom when one of my students brought me a drawing. It was a picture of me holding hands with 2 children. The little girl pointed and said, "That's you and your kids, right?" I laughed and told her I didn't have any children. She frowned and said, "But you used to." That night, I asked Ethan about it. "Do we know anyone named Anna? Or anyone who looks like me?" He hesitated before answering. "No, Nora. You probably just look like someone people knew before." His voice was calm, but his eyes gave away something else, fear. I tried to ignore it. I told myself trauma can play tricks on the brain. The therapist said confusion was normal during recovery. Still, every time I walked past our family photo wall, I felt unsettled. There were dozens of pictures, wedding photos, vacations, birthdays, but not a single one from before 5 years ago. And when I asked my mother about my childhood photos, she said she'd lost them in a house fire years ago. I wanted to believe her, but deep down, something didn't feel right. Then came that night, the knock at the door, the woman in the veil, the words that turned my world upside down. After she said, "You stole my life," Ethan rushed to the door, his face drained of color. "You need to leave," he told her, his voice trembling. But the woman didn't move. She lifted the veil from her face, and for the first time, I saw her clearly. She looked exactly like me. Same eyes, same freckles, same scar on the collarbone. My knees felt weak. "Who are you?" I whispered. She stared at me with tears in her eyes. "You're living my life. My name is Ivy Grant, and 6 months ago, I was in the same accident you were. The only difference is, I didn't wake up as me." Ethan grabbed my arm. "Don't listen to her, Nora. She's delusional." But something inside me, something deeper than memory, told me he was lying. As Ivy stood there, rain dripping down her pale face, I felt the ground beneath me shift. My past, my marriage, my name, everything suddenly felt borrowed, like I was standing inside someone else's story. And the worst part, I wasn't sure which one of us was real. The air felt heavier than before, thick with fear and confusion. Rain was still falling outside, tapping softly against the windows. But inside the house, everything stood still. Ethan's grip on my arm tightened as he glared at the woman who looked exactly like me. Her name, Ivy Grant, hung in the air like a curse I didn't understand. "Ethan, what is she talking about?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Why does she look like me?" He didn't answer. He only said, "She's mistaken, Nora. She's been following us for weeks. She needs help." But the woman's eyes burned with something that didn't look like madness. It looked like truth. She took a step forward, her voice breaking. "I know this is hard to believe, but you're not who you think you are. You're living my life, my home, my husband, everything that used to be mine." My stomach twisted. I wanted to yell at her, to throw her out, to make it stop. But I couldn't move. Her words echoed in my head. "You're living my life." My mother rushed in from the kitchen, her face pale. When she saw Ivy, she gasped and dropped the plate she was holding. The sound of it shattering on the floor made me jump. "Mom?" I whispered. "Do you know her?" Her lips parted, but she didn't speak. Her eyes darted between me and Ivy, filling with tears she didn't try to hide. "Nora, please go upstairs," she said softly. "Let us handle this." "Handle what?" I demanded. "You're acting like she's real, like she's telling the truth." Ethan stepped forward again. "Nora, please, listen to me. You've been through a lot since the accident. You can't trust your mind right now." But I wasn't looking at him anymore. I was staring at Ivy, who reached into her pocket and pulled out something small, a photograph. She handed it to me with shaking hands. The photo showed Ethan and Ivy standing in front of a white house, the same White House we were standing in now. Her hair was shorter, her smile wide and bright, but it was unmistakably her, and the house behind her was mine. My knees felt weak, and I gripped the edge of the doorframe to stay upright. This isn't possible." Ivy's voice softened. "I know. I didn't believe it either. But after the crash, I woke up in a hospital under someone else's name. They said my memory was gone, that I'd suffered trauma. I spent months in rehab, trying to remember who I was. When I finally found my way back here, you were already in my place." I shook my head. No, I have memories. I remember growing up here. I remember my mother." I turned to look at her, but she couldn't meet my eyes. "Tell her, Mom," I said, my voice cracking. "Tell her she's wrong." My mother's voice broke when she spoke. "Nora, please, just sit down. We'll explain everything later." That was the moment I realized no one was denying it. Not Ethan, not my mother. The silence was its own confession. I looked at Ethan, and the truth hit me like a blow. "You knew," I whispered. "You knew who she was this whole time." He took a step toward me, panic in his eyes. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen. The doctors—" "Stop lying!" I screamed. "Tell me the truth." Ivy's voice rose suddenly, her calm breaking. "He knew because I'm his wife." The room fell silent. I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears. Ethan's face drained of color. "Ivy, don't," he said, his voice shaking. But she continued. "We were married for 6 years. When the accident happened, they told him I wouldn't survive. And then somehow, you appeared, with my memories, my name, my face." She turned to Ethan. "You let her live my life because you couldn't let go of me." The floor felt like it was tilting beneath me. I couldn't breathe. "That's not true," I said weakly, though I wasn't sure who I was trying to convince. Ethan reached for me again, but I backed away. "Don't touch me," I whispered. "Who am I? What did you do to me?" He rubbed his face, his voice breaking. "I wanted to tell you, but I didn't know how. The doctors said said your brain had copied her patterns after the trauma. They told me you were a second chance." "A second chance?" I repeated, my voice trembling. "You turned me into someone else's replacement." Ivy was crying now, her voice shaking with pain and anger. "You let her live my life while I was locked in a hospital, forgotten." Ethan turned away, unable to look at either of us. My mother's sobs filled the silence. I felt my world crumble piece by piece. Everything, my name, my memories, my marriage, was built on lies. I looked at the photograph still in my hand. The woman in it, her smile, her home, her husband, had all belonged to Ivy, and now I didn't even know who I was. When I spoke again, my voice was quiet but sharp. I want answers. All of them. And if none of you will tell me, I'll find them myself. Then I walked out the door, the rain soaking my dress, the photo still clutched in my hand. For the first time since the accident, I wasn't afraid of forgetting. I was afraid of remembering. The rain hadn't stopped that night, but I didn't care. I kept walking until my legs burned and my mind went numb. I needed air, space, anything to stop the feeling that my whole life was collapsing under the weight of someone else's truth. I ended up sitting in my car outside a small diner on the edge of town, staring through the windshield as the rain blurred the lights. My hands were still clutching the photo Ivy had given me. I turned it over again and again, tracing the date written on the back. 2017, the year I supposedly met Ethan, but the photo showed them together long before that. My world, my marriage, every part of my story had been borrowed from hers. When I finally drove home, the house was dark. My mother was gone, and Ethan was waiting for me in the living room, sitting in the same chair he'd always sat in. But now, I couldn't look at him without feeling sick. The man I thought was my husband had looked at me every day knowing I wasn't who I believed myself to be. He stood up the moment I walked in. "Nora, please, let me explain," he said. "Don't call me that," I snapped. "I don't even know who that is anymore." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "You are Nora, the woman I love, the woman I built this life with." Whatever Ivy said, I interrupted, my voice shaking. "She showed me proof, Ethan. She showed me our house before it was ours. She showed me her face. My face. You lied to me every single day. Why?" His eyes filled with guilt. "Because I didn't want to lose you again." I stared at him, unable to process what he meant. Lose me again? He sat down heavily, burying his face in his hands. "When the accident happened, there were two of you. You were both in the car that night. You both looked the same, had the same blood type, same injuries. One of you was unconscious, barely breathing, and the doctors didn't think she'd make it. The other woke up confused, terrified, with fragments of memory that didn't belong to her. They said it was a psychological mirroring condition. That trauma confused memory patterns between identical individuals. I didn't understand it. All I knew was that when I looked into your eyes, you remembered me, not her, and I couldn't let you go." His words hit me like a punch. "You mean to tell me that I'm some copy of her? A version of her that just replaced the real thing?" He looked up at me, his eyes desperate. "No, not a copy. You're you. I don't know what you are, Nora. Maybe a miracle, maybe a mistake, but you're alive. You're real to me." I shook my head, tears streaming down my face. "You fell in love with her face, not me. You kept me here because you couldn't deal with losing her. You built this entire life on a lie." He reached for my hand, but I stepped back. "Stop pretending this was love. You never gave me a choice." That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the moonlight stretching across the floor, wondering what it meant to be real. Every memory I had felt like borrowed light from someone else's life. I didn't know what to believe anymore, but one thing was clear. I couldn't live like this. I couldn't stay in a house built on someone else's ghost. The next morning, I drove to the hospital where I'd been treated after the accident. I needed to see the truth for myself. When I walked into the records department and gave my name, the nurse frowned. "Nora Hale?" she asked, typing on her computer. "Are you sure you were treated here?" My stomach dropped. "Yes, 6 months ago." She shook her head. "We don't have a patient file under that name." I froze. "Can you check for Ivy Grant?" After a few seconds of typing, the nurse nodded. "Yes, Ivy Grant, admitted 6 months ago. Car accident, multiple surgeries, discharged 3 months ago." I felt my knees go weak. My entire existence was paper thin, not even recorded, not even real in the system that supposedly saved me. I walked out of the hospital trembling, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. When I got home, I went straight to the attic. There had always been a locked trunk in the corner. Something Ethan said contained old paperwork. I broke the lock with a hammer. Inside were stacks of medical files, photos, and a folder labeled Project Aria. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside were clinical notes, images of brain scans, and two names written side by side: Ivy Grant, original, and Nora Hale, subject reconstruction. My heart stopped. The reports talked about memory transfer protocols, identity synchronization, and experimental recovery through neural mapping. I could barely read through the blur of my tears. I wasn't just someone who looked like Ivy. I had been created to replace her, a manufactured identity built from her memories. I dropped the file and stumbled backward, my breath shallow. None of this made sense, and yet it explained everything. The gaps in my memory, the missing childhood, the fear in my mother's eyes. She wasn't my real mother at all. She had been hired to care for me after the procedure, to keep me believing the lie. That was the moment everything changed inside me. Fear turned into anger, and confusion turned into clarity. I realized I couldn't let Ethan or anyone else decide who I was anymore. Maybe I was a mistake. Maybe I was something unnatural, but I was alive. I had feelings, thoughts, and choices of my own. I packed a bag that night. When Ethan came home, I was already standing by the door. "Where are you going?" he asked, his voice breaking. "To find out who made me," I said, "and to destroy the people who thought they could own my life." For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. He stepped aside as I walked past him, the rain starting again outside. I didn't know where the road would take me, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't living someone else's story anymore. I was writing my own. The drive to the research facility felt endless. Every mile I passed only deepened the storm building inside me. The folder marked Project Area sat on the passenger seat, its papers fluttering every time I hit a bump. I kept glancing at the name typed in bold letters, Nora Hale, subject reconstruction, like it was mocking me. My hands trembled on the steering wheel. I wasn't sure if I was ready to face the truth, but I couldn't live without knowing. I had spent my whole life believing I was someone. I just needed to find out who. The building appeared in the distance, a sterile white structure hidden behind tall metal gates. A sign read, Grant Biogenetics Laboratory. My heart dropped at the sight of Ivy's last name. I parked outside and walked in through the front doors. The receptionist looked up from her desk, startled. "Ma'am, you can't be here without an appointment." I ignored her and pushed through the corridor until I found a nameplate on a glass door. Dr. Alan Mercer, Director of Research. I didn't knock. I stormed in, and the man sitting behind the desk nearly jumped out of his chair. "You need to tell me what this is," I said, slamming the Project Aria file onto his desk. He blinked, adjusting his glasses. "Where did you get that?" "I found it in my house, the house that used to belong to Ivy Grant. And before you try to deny it, I know what it means. I want to know what you did to me." Dr. Mercer sighed and sank back into his chair. His voice was calm, but filled with unease. "You shouldn't have come here, Nora. This was never meant for you." "That's not my name," I shouted. "I don't even know who I am anymore." He hesitated for a moment, then said quietly, "Your name was given to you 6 months ago. You were part of a neurological experiment, an attempt to preserve human consciousness after trauma. Ivy Grant was our subject. When she was declared brain dead after the accident, her husband, Ethan, funded our project to try to save her. We succeeded, in a way, but instead of restoring Ivy, we created you." My breath caught in my throat. "You mean I'm not her, but I'm not me either?" Dr. Mercer looked down at the folder. The brain mapping process copied her neural patterns into a healthy host, her biological replica, grown from her own DNA. You carry her memories, her instincts, even her habits. But over time, your mind began developing its own pathways. You became your own person. I stepped back, my whole body shaking. "So I'm... what? Some kind of experiment?" He met my eyes. "You're more than that. You were never supposed to wake up. The process was unstable. But when you did, Ethan couldn't let you go. He convinced us to keep it quiet. He said if you believed you were her, you could live a normal life. That's what he wanted, for you to replace her." I felt my chest tighten. The anger and disbelief were mixing into something sharp and unbearable. So, he made me live her life? Wear her clothes? Sleep in her bed? Love her husband? Dr. Mercer nodded slightly. He was desperate. He thought he'd lost the woman he loved, but he didn't realize he'd created someone new, someone real. Before I could respond, the office door swung open. Ethan stood there, soaked from the rain, his face pale. "Nora, please don't do this." I turned to face him, my voice shaking with rage. "You knew all along." He stepped closer, his eyes full of guilt. "I thought I could protect you. I thought I could make you happy. I didn't want you to suffer like Ivy did." I stared at him, tears stinging my eyes. "You didn't protect me. You stole my life before it ever started." From behind him, another voice spoke. It was Ivy. She stepped into the doorway, wearing a hospital gown, her hair cropped short. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow. "You took everything from me," she said to Ethan, "and from her." Ethan turned to her, his voice cracking. "You don't understand, Ivy. You were gone. They said you'd never wake up." "But I did," she whispered. "And when I did, you were gone." The two of them stood there, husband and wife, creator and creation, and I realized the cruelty of it all. None of us had chosen this. We were all victims of Ethan's obsession with control, his refusal to let go of what he'd lost. I stepped between them, my voice steady now. "You wanted to save her, Ethan, but you destroyed both of us." His shoulders slumped. "I never meant to hurt you." I looked at him with a calm I didn't feel. "You didn't hurt me. You erased me." Ivy looked at me then, her eyes softening. "You don't deserve this. Neither of us does." Something inside me snapped. I turned to Dr. Mercer. "Where are the servers? The files that made me?" He hesitated. "Nora, I'm not asking again." He pointed toward the basement lab. I ran. Ethan and Ivy followed, shouting my name, but I didn't stop. I burst through the lab doors and saw rows of computers, blinking monitors, and storage drives labeled ARIA Sequence. This was where my existence had been built. My entire identity was sitting on these machines like a downloadable file. I grabbed a metal rod from a workbench and started smashing the equipment. Sparks flew, alarms blared, and Ethan screamed my name. "Stop! You'll destroy everything!" "That's the point," I shouted. "No one should play God." The lights flickered, the machines caught fire, and I watched the screens die one by one. All the data, all the lies, all the stolen memories, gone. Ivy stood at the doorway, tears in her eyes. "You freed us both," she whispered. As the alarms grew louder, I turned to her. "You can have your life back now. I'm taking mine." I ran out of the building before it went up in flames. Behind me, smoke curled into the dark sky. My body was shaking, but for the first time, my mind was clear. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but I knew this much. I wasn't a project or a copy or someone's second chance. I was finally free. When the fire alarms faded into the distance, all I could hear was the sound of my own breathing. I stood outside the burning lab, soaked from the rain, the smoke mixing with the mist until the entire sky seemed to dissolve into gray. Fire trucks and sirens filled the night, flashing red and blue across my face. People ran, shouted, tried to contain what was already gone. But I didn't move. Everything that had made me, everything that had defined my existence, was now burning in that building. My past, my fake identity, my artificial memories. They were ashes now, and strangely, for the first time in my life, I felt free. The police questioned me for hours, but I told them only what they needed to hear. There was an accident, a fire, and I was in the wrong place at the wrong time. They didn't press further. Maybe they saw something in my eyes, something broken, something tired, that told them I wasn't lying about losing everything. By dawn, they let me go. I didn't go home. I couldn't. The place where I lived wasn't mine anymore. It had belonged to Ivy first. Instead, I drove, for hours, through empty highways, past dark fields and small towns that all looked the same. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I needed distance. From Ethan, from the lab, from every piece of the story that had chained me to someone else's life. When the sun finally rose, I pulled over near a small coastal town. The ocean stretched endlessly before me, calm and silent, its surface glimmering with gold. I stood there barefoot on the wet sand, letting the waves wash over my feet. That's when it hit me. The ocean didn't ask where it came from or who it belonged to. It just existed, constant, free, changing with the tide, but always whole. I realized that's what I wanted to be. I didn't need to remember who I had been before or understand who I was supposed to be. I just needed to live. I rented a small apartment overlooking the shore, a quiet place with peeling white walls and a single window that faced the sea. It wasn't much, but it was mine. For weeks, I didn't speak to anyone. I spent my mornings walking along the water and my nights painting, trying to fill the empty walls with color. At first, everything I painted was gray, the same color as the smoke from the lab. But slowly, colors began to return. Soft blues, golden yellows, and deep greens. Life was finding its way back to me, brushstroke by brushstroke. One afternoon, as I was painting, there was a letter slipped under my door. My heart stopped when I saw the handwriting. It was Ivy's. For a moment, I didn't want to open it. Part of me was afraid it would drag me back into the pain I had just escaped. But curiosity, and something close to compassion, made me unfold the paper. Inside was a single photograph. It showed Ivy sitting on a hospital bench, sunlight on her face. She looked healthy, alive. On the back, she had written, "We both deserve to live. Thank you for giving me that chance. You may not have been born like me, but you are more human than anyone I know. Start over. Live for yourself." I held the photo for a long time, tears filling my eyes. I wasn't angry anymore. I didn't blame her, or even Ethan. We were all caught in a web of lies built by fear. Fear of loss, fear of letting go, fear of facing the truth. But the only way to live was to break free from it, even if it meant burning everything behind me. A month later, I started teaching again at a local community center. The children there didn't care about who I was or where I came from. They only cared that I showed up, that I listened, that I taught them how to create. Their laughter filled the room, and for the first time, I felt like I belonged somewhere. I was no longer trying to fit into someone else's world. I was building my own. Sometimes, I still dream about the accident, the crash, the light, the darkness that followed, but I don't wake up afraid anymore. I wake up grateful that I was given a second chance, even if it came from something unnatural. Because maybe what defines us isn't how we begin, but what we do with the time we're given. I wasn't created to live someone else's life. I was created to find my own. A few months later, I returned to the city once more, just to see what remained. The lab was gone, the building reduced to rubble and weeds. There was no sign of Ethan, no trace of the man who had once called me his wife. Part of me wondered if he had survived the fire, but another part didn't want to know. Some answers don't bring peace. They only reopen old wounds. As I stood there one last time, the wind carried the scent of smoke and salt water together. I smiled faintly, because both smelled like endings and beginnings at once. I whispered to myself, I'm not her shadow anymore. I'm real. I got back in my car and drove toward the coast. The road ahead open and endless. The radio played softly, a song I'd never heard before, but it felt like it was written just for me. The horizon was wide, golden, and waiting. That night, I sat by my window, watching the tide come in. I picked up my journal, the one I'd once used to record fragments of a life that wasn't mine, and started a new page. At the top, I wrote a single sentence. My name is Nora Hale, and this time, I belong to myself. I didn't need to explain what happened or who I used to be. The ocean already knew, and so did I. The waves crashed softly outside, steady and sure, whispering that even broken beginnings can lead to beautiful endings. And as I closed my journal, I smiled. The past was gone, but my story was just beginning. If this story moved you, make sure to subscribe to my channel and comment below where you're watching from. And remember, your life belongs to you, no matter where it began.